Hello and welcome to the Presbyterian Church in Westfield. And if it feels as though the world is coming apart at the seams these days, or that our culture is becoming unhinged, you're not alone. In fact, many people from a variety of different religious backgrounds are beginning to wonder how their faith connects with this increasingly divided and tumultuous culture. Well, for Christians, everything hinges on Christ, and in earnestly trying to align our lives with His. And before diving into everything today, I want to share with you a little story from this past week that I think will help us try to answer that starting question, or that starting sense of interest. For those who may not have heard of it, the Mandela effect is a form of false memory. It's kind of like deja vu, only with deja vu, typically we are overtired or we're really stressed out, and so we're tricked into thinking that what we're experiencing right now is actually a memory. It has to do with our frontal lobe getting confused and flipping the switch to treat something as a memory that's actually being experienced in the present. Well, the Mandela effect is a little bit different in the way that it's a false memory. It has to do with wrongly remembering a certain circumstance or an event, and most often this is shared. Like, a whole lot of people have the same false memory, and I think it actually, in a way, almost becomes a metaphor for much of what we're facing in day-to-day culture. But I want to share the Mandela effect a little bit with you. The origin of the name actually has to do with Nelson Mandela. There's a lot of people who have a false memory of him having died in prison. But he didn't. He lived, he went on to become the president of South Africa, and he had a long and free life after his imprisonment. But that false memory is something that's pretty profound, and people have very distinct understanding of saying, no, I saw that, I knew that. And a very similar one took place following 9/11, in the years following 9/11. There is a distinct, within certain people, memory of watching on the news the first plane hitting, but that was never on the news. So it's a mixing up or forming in our brains of something that did not take place, but we have a very distinct memory of it. And well, this week I kind of bumped into my own version of that. I was looking for a video of George Burns. So some people are probably not going to know who George Burns was. He was a comedian. Was known for being a bespectacled old man with a cigar, and he would pace the stage and throw off these absolutely just amazing observations or one-liners. And one of my favorites, I can see it so vividly of him, is standing on the stage, and he looks off at the audience and comes back to camera, and he says, the secret of success is being sincere. You fake that and you've got it made. And it always stuck with me. I have not only the distinct memory of him having said it, but I've repeated this at dinner parties. I've used the quip in blogs and all sorts of different writings, and done it for years. I had this whole thing worked out where I said, oh goodness, based on what I've read with Paul this week that we're going to get to later, this is a wonderful way to talk about sincerity. We have this wonderful setup to be able to talk about or help us understand whether or not we're motivated by real and true desires, or ultimately faking the whole thing. But the clip wasn't there. I couldn't find it anywhere. I looked at YouTube, I looked at Google, and it might exist out there, but while I have that very distinct memory of having seen this and watching this man say it, I could find no trace of it online. And that's only the beginning. When I started to dig about it and try to find it, by just doing larger searches and more open searches, I began to discover that the very origin of this saying is actually up for grabs. Comedians, philosophers, playwrights have all been credited with this saying over the past 60 years or so. And so as we're getting started this morning, I'm pondering the fact that George Burns very well may have actually said this. There may be video out there that I just couldn't find. My memory might serve. But I'm forced to realize that I actually cannot trust my memory, my point of view, my perspective as a fact. And I think that's really kind of where we're starting today is that there is something akin to the Mandela effect. It has to do with a false memory being created, but there is something about our perspective these days being so skewed by outside forces. I mean, in this world in which we're living right now that is being turned upside down, it makes me realize that there's so much that we take for granted that is actually hard to trust these days. So moving beyond party politics or news sources, moving beyond the struggles and the fights over masks and the illnesses, moving beyond even frustrations over school openings and closings and safety protocols, is all bigger than our perceptions. We're being driven these days by forces that sometimes we can scarcely understand. Marketing and social media plays a massive force on many of us. Social expectations and different friend groups influence the way that we perceive our world. Our own feelings even, all of it joins together, and these are forces, influences that are boiling around us all the time. And this is the problem. If we don't take time, if we don't take the deep breath and step back and reflect on what is driving us and our behaviors and even the way that we see the world, if we don't step back and reflect on what's motivating us, then we run the risk of having our faith itself become merely a reflection of all the rest of our habits and our likes and even our values. Our faith then becomes our own personal interpretation of what we view as being the best possible. And that's not faith. In pretty much any religious background, that's not faith. So the words that we encounter today, later in Scripture, and the reflections on it, I hope will help us step away from all these influences that are shading or obscuring our own perception of the world, and give us a different way of being motivated and working through it. So we're going to go back to the very beginning that we started with this morning of our talk to remember where all of this is coming from, okay? People from all sorts of walks of life, from all kinds of different religious traditions, are beginning to really wonder how all of our faith might intersect with this increasingly divided world of ours. So when we're driven by these outside forces of culture and all the rest of it, our memories, our views, our reality, it's all drawn really ultimately from that perspective. And so what's at stake? Well, I think what's at stake comes to life through the words that we hear in Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians. And so I want us to take a moment and hear it in Paul's own words and then reflect together. So Paul, again, just for those of you who may be less familiar with this little letter or the community in Thessalonica, so this is a small church community that is north of Greece. It's in Macedonia, and Thessalonica at the time was the capital city of that region. And Paul and some of his followers had gone and started a church there, and since he had left it, that little community had made this huge impact on all kinds of other churches throughout the whole region. They've been not only really generous with their time and their energy and even their money, but they also had just been become so beloved and so trusted by other Christians in the region. They were looked at as leaders. But the flip side is that they had also come under a lot of persecution from the local synagogue, from local businesses, from the people that ran town, etc. And they were pushed to the margins, and they were really struggling with how their faith could possibly intersect with their local community. They were beginning to even wonder, what's the point of it all? Is there really much to this faith of ours? They felt deeply, they were deeply committed, but they were struggling. And so in today's reading is right at the very, is pretty close to the beginning of the letter, and it's not a very big one, but Paul is trying to help them understand why this faith, as simple as it can be, matters so much. And spoiler alert, what it gets down to is Paul is trying to help them understand that ultimately it's just our relationships. That's really it. All that we're left at the end of the day is not the big things or winning the big struggles of life. It's the relationships that we have. And so again, here's Paul's words on it. So he tells them, you yourselves know, brothers and sisters, that our coming to you was not in vain, but though we had already suffered and been shamefully maltreated at Philippi, as you know, we had courage in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in spite of great opposition. For our appeal does not spring from deceit or impure motives or trickery, but just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the message of the gospel, even so we speak not to please mortals, but to please God who tests our hearts. And you know, as God is our witness, we never came with words of flattery or a pretext for greed, nor did we seek praise from mortals, whether from you or from others, though we might have made demands as apostles from Christ, but we were gentle among you, like a nurse, tenderly caring for her own children. So deeply do we care for you that we are determined to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you have become very dear to us. Man, that's beautiful. Now, before we move on and talk about whether or not you caught certain things, I want to repeat that last line. He says, so deeply do we care for you that we are determined to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you have become very dear to us. Everything hinges on that relationship. But let's back up for a second to try to catch something. Did you catch right in the middle something he was doing? You see, Paul repeats himself effectively twice, right in the middle of this little passage. He says, we didn't come from deceit or from impure motives or trickery, and not to please mortals. And then he almost in the next line, he repeats himself. Then again, he right after that, he repeats himself and says, we never came with words of flattery or with a pretext for greed, nor did we seek the praise of mortals. Well, see, that was all done to really emphasize what was driving Paul and these other leaders in building this church up, of building these relationships, of fostering these relationships that they hold so dear. See, Paul and his fellow leaders, they've been driven by a simple desire to care for these people, to make every single encounter with them one of tender care and nurture. At the end of the day, I would say we could almost stop right there and say, that's the point. Yay, good on us. Don't let any of the outside forces of the world get you down. Just meet each other with a true desire to care for them. Because if we step back for a moment, if we step back and we start asking what's motivating us in our day-to-day right now, Paul is offering us an alternative. If we stop and really think about what's motivating you at home, what's motivating me, what's motivating each of us, it's all different stuff. You see, for some of us, it's going to be pure grit and determination. We're just going to get through this thing. We're going to clench our teeth and we're going to make it. Well, for others, it's almost just out of habit. We're going to continue doing the day-to-day, putting one foot in front of the other, because that's what we do. It's very much an approach to life that's that English stiff upper lip and all that. Well, there's also a hidden gift and anxiety to a degree for some of us. For some of us, it's our anxiety itself that forces us to function and overfunction through times such as these to get us up in the morning and drive us forward and make us do the work. I'm also seeing another one. For some of us, the motivation is utterly slipping away, gone like a memory. And to be honest, I'm seeing this one more and more. I'm seeing more and more often this last instance of a lack of motivation, a lack of drive, a lack of being able to get up and get moving to any degree. I'm seeing it in friends here in the church, here in town, in our schools, with some of the parents, with our neighbors. There's a certain slowing down that I've started to notice in the community. We're becoming more inert. Motivation is becoming harder and harder for some people, and I don't blame them. I mean, so much of our everyday has been drawn together by the energy that we can kind of muster on our own. I mean, our desires for goods and services drive our industry and our work. Our desire for station sometimes will drive some, drive the ambition for some people. Our desire for company, for relationships, drives our social lives. Our desires, the desires of others, so much of our motivation it works really well when things work well. But right now, with the discord, with all the dysfunction happening around us, things are starting to slow down and people are losing motivation. And so I see this real gift, this promise in the words from Paul this week, that the only motivation that we need in this life or any other is to be led by a devotion to living sincerely, because that really comes from God. And here Paul invites us today to recognize another path, another way of being that steps away from being caught up by the demands and strictures of society that moves us beyond the stress and the clamor that is going on politically and socially and everything else. The path before us is determined not by the wheels of industry, the Western culture, the American dream even, or these culture wars we're facing. Instead, even if we recognize there's good days and bad, there's ups and downs, if we stop and we remember that it is a simple desire to have real relationships with other people, to build in our personal lives relationships that matter. If we stop and think about our every engagement with teachers or local leaders or our neighbors, that every single engagement is an opportunity for us to meet somebody else sincerely, expecting the best, wanting the best, being able to even get through discord to find something real. I have a feeling that'll drive us right through all the inconveniences, all the pain, even the suffering of all the discord we're facing these days. As we begin to reflect on the life that Paul is describing to these people that are hurting in this church from nearly 2,000 years ago, he doesn't exactly put it into these words, but I would say that everyday faith today, like if you're one of these people that is wondering, how does my faith intersect in an increasingly divisive world right now? I would say that our everyday faith at this time, it's not complicated. I think he would agree, even though he might not say it this way, but it's a simple matter of meeting people with the sincere intent that every single encounter will reflect the life of Jesus Christ. That we are aligning our lives with his, and that every single meeting that we have, every single relationship that we're building is being driven by a sincere motivation to see that person fully. Not to look at them as a potential adversary or someone who is wrong because they don't share the same views as us. And it's my sincere hope that the next time that you need a little motivation in your life, that you'll remember this wisdom that we heard from Paul today. Your life can be a gift for other people just by being fully present with them, by being fully open, and by remembering that they have the potential to become very dear to you as well. Amen, my friends, and I hope this carries with you this next week.